I would like to welcome the following industry representatives to the stage. Mardi Ashkine from the Casuarina, the GPT Group. Quentin, Kilian, CEO of the Real Estate Institute of the Northern Territory. Clare Martin, former Chief Minister of the NT and Team NT Executive. David Tollner, former member for Solomon and former Treasurer in the Giles Administration. Dr. Vemuri, Senior Lecturer Economics at Charles Darwin University. And finally, Stephanie Stonier, Corporate Affairs Manager for the Northern Territory, Origin Energy. And that's our panel today. I am now going to be with I'm tasked with the responsibility of digging down and trying to find out exactly whether we've got a territory tomorrow or not. I'd like to start with Mardi Ashkine from the GPT Group. Mardi, one of the things, I mean, we all know, of course, that the NT is going through some tough times and has been for the last 3 years. And that's why we're here, to talk about that and to talk about whether we see a way through this and what that way looks like. From a retail perspective, Mardi, one of the things that did jump out at me was the fact that GPT did do an expansion in 2016 with the quarter out at Casuarina Square, which I know anyone that's ever been out there to visit it, it's quite an impressive development. And then you've done some further expansion as well. And you must be one of the few retailers out there that has actually been expanding in this quite contracting market. Because when we look around to see what's happening out here in the NT, particularly in the CBD, what we see are businesses closing and moving out. But you guys have expanded. Can you just give us some explanation as to why you've been doing that and where you see the NT going?
Sure. So what happened for us, probably for the first time in a long time, is that we had real competition enter the market. So I'd probably be asking Gateway the same question. Why did you open when you opened, given the current situation? So we hadn't really done a lot with the asset for a very, very long time. It was very tired and dated. The product hadn't evolved at all. So with increased competition coming to the market, it really forced us as a landlord to look at the centre, look at the offer, and make sure that we could be competitive and still relevant. So we spent $35 million adding dining and entertainment. We've spent a further $8.5 million upgrading the food court. And right now, this year, we're currently spending another $13 million on aesthetic upgrades. So whilst it wasn't probably the best time to invest that kind of money, we still needed to maintain a competitive edge. And I think with competition, the consumer has benefited. And I think consumers now, particularly in retail environments, are demanding a whole lot more of a retail experience. It's about placemaking, it's about customisation. People want to shop brands that are aligned with their own personal value set. So for us, continuing to evolve is really important. And part of that's not just investing in place, but we've also introduced 26 new brands to the market over the last 3 years. So our intent is to make sure Casuarina is still the dominant retail destination in the market. We're not looking to what everyone else is doing. We're looking to make sure that we can continue to improve ourselves.
So what do you see are the challenges of doing business in the Territory right now?
Well, our business very much relies on people and their propensity to spend. So for us, population growth is very, very important, and a population that is made up of people that have a decent disposable income. Probably the three main things then is for us is population. The cost of doing business up here is often unpalatable for retailers. So our geographical isolation and probably the size of the market up here, for a lot of national brands, it doesn't make sense to just open one store because of what it costs to ship goods, have staff on the ground and maintain that store. Historically, though, that's been compelling enough because of the sales that they're pulling out of the stores up here. Not so much right now. Attracting and retaining talent is also, a big issue. So making sure that Darwin is a desirable place to live. And then probably the big thing for us that is a real deterrent is the antisocial issues that we encounter every single day in the centre.
Talking about antisocial issues, because I know that comes up a lot, and in fact, in our firm, it's been quite alarming the number of new clients that we have received over the last 12 months that have asked us for assistance in dealing with this problem, which we'd never had before. What strategies have you put in place, or do you have any strategies for dealing with this type of thing?
Yeah, look, what we're seeing is symptomatic of what's happening across all of Darwin. But about 2.5 years ago, it was absolutely out of control. I'm not saying it's necessarily gotten any better, but we have probably, as a business, got a much better handle on how we manage it and how we manage our site. So we started recording security statistics consistently for the last 2.5 years. And on average, our security are dealing with 30 incidents a day. And one incident could involve moving on up to 20 plus people. The areas that we are dealing with is alcohol issues, homelessness, but probably the most destructive for us is the youth crime. So as a business, we have had to up the ante on our security spend. We're spending $1.6 million just on security resourcing annually. That doesn't include CCTV, property damage, repairs and maintenance, etc. So that's kind of an unsustainable business model, and it's probably double what, say, a big shopping centre at High Point in Melbourne's West would be spending on security. So it has an impact to us every day. So safety and the perception of safety is compromised. It costs us money, reputational damage. So we thought, well, what else can we do besides being reactive to the situation as, a key gathering place in the top end? How can we as a business contribute to social improvement? How can we get ahead of the issues before they occur? So we engaged EY. We've done a whole lot of work. We've developed a social plan. We've appointed a community engagement manager. We secured a very small amount of government grant funding. We're running youth programming activities. We've retrained our security guards on how to interact with kids and deal with antisocial behaviour. So as a business, we're getting behind taking a different approach. We've engaged with a whole range of community stakeholders, from Red Cross to Larrakia Nation to Centrelink, because our belief too is that it takes a whole of community approach to deal with some of these issues.
Quentin, you've been quite busy writing articles for Realm, talking about the real estate sector. Of course, it's one of the most important sectors in the Northern Territory. I noticed your last piece of writing was called Same, Same, But Different. Can you give us a bit of an analysis as to where the real estate sector has gone in the last 12 months?
The reason it was same, but different is because we haven't seen a dramatic change for about the last 2 years, I suppose. We have seen a downward drift or a downward spiral at the beginning. We did see a bit of a kickback in the marketplace around the December quarter, and that was quite an interesting anomaly. I was hoping it would carry through, but it didn't, unfortunately. The March quarter saw a retraction back into red ink again. I suppose the high point of what is happening at the moment is that we've seen a slight upward trend in the median price. So the median price has jumped about 1.8% and just taken it back over the $500,000 mark. Is that sustainable? I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see what the June quarter says as to whether that then signals whether or not we've hit the bottom of that slide. The troubling thing for us, though, is that the volumes are still sliding. It's not all doom and gloom. There is still activity out there. There are still sales going on. Our members are doing business. People are still trading in real estate, but the volumes are not reflecting what they should for a buoyant and positive market. And that comes back to one of the points that Mardi touched on earlier, which is population. That's the key underlying premise of all of this. We are a supply and demand industry. At the moment, we have a lot of supply and we have a dwindling demand. So we've got to turn that demand around. We've got to reboost that population, because without people to buy things, we have an industry that's trying to sell them something that there's nobody there to buy.
On that very issue, the government initiated a policy back in February of this year called the Build Bonus Grant, which was $20,000 to assist people to construct new houses. Given what you're talking about in relation to population, in relation to weak demand, do you see that as a positive step or a negative step?
Look, anything that stimulates the market is in itself a positive point. Now, whether or not the construct of a $20,000 bonus is actually going to stimulate the market or push prices up is a sort of argument in itself. But at the moment, I'm led to understand that about 50 people have taken up that build bonus so far. Extrapolate that out to the 50 new houses that will be built and the tradies that will be paid and the flow through of cash into the economy, and it's actually a good thing. What I'm more interested in from our side of the fence, though, is not so much the new buildings, but the movement of the supply of the existing properties. And so a $20,000 build bonus doesn't actually help our side of the equation. That helps the new construct. It also doesn't necessarily flow through to new arrivals into town, because the $20,000 build bonus does apply to anybody, including a Territorian, that wants to build a property. So it's not necessarily working as an attractant to people coming to town. But if you then take it another step further, and they're wonderful things, I applaud all of the incentives that the government has put in place, the My Territory Home and all of the first home incentives, they're fantastic. But they alone are not going to draw people to a new city to live. The first thing they're looking for is a job. How am I going to make my living? How am I going to pay for things? Then, what incentives have I got? So, the housing incentives alone are not the attractant for a population regrowth.
Ram, you're the resident economist in the room. You've listened to both Mardi and Quentin. Do you have any comment in relation to what they've said so far?
Yeah, I think a couple of comments, actually. I don't think it's a question about evaluating what the governments are doing. It's about what is the impact it's having. And that requires all the people sitting in this room and everybody else reacting to what governments are doing. When we talk about jobs, the question that people are asking is, jobs at what cost and to whom? How long is this going to last? Because by spending money on jobs or job creation by the public sector, the government, it's not going to generate the multiplier effects that we actually expect. It's the actual private sector that generates these kind of jobs. We have had repeatedly, over the last 30 years I've been here, looking at this whole concept of saying, we are asking governments more and more and more to engage with economic activity in various forms, but the reaction to that has not been sustainable. And that's my greatest concern. When people are actually looking at, for example, the GPT investing, that's fantastic. People are here. People are continuing to be here no matter what happens. And I think it's extremely important to think about the reason people are here is not because they're depending on governments to make money or to create jobs or create opportunities. We are here because we are people who matter in our lifestyle, in our life changes, the way in which we can actually contribute. And I feel a bit reactive in the sense, it's not a question of same, and what did you say, Quentin?
Same, but different.
I have a feeling it's same. And the reality is not because people get up in the morning and say, I'll make your life miserable. I think none of us do that. We all want to contribute very positively. We want to do the right thing. Governments want to do the right thing, no matter what party you belong to. People want to do the right thing. But guess what? It ain't happening. And the reason why it's not happening is because we are doing the same. And what are we doing? Same. For example, here is a situation where we are saying to people that our economy is actually in this state. And I want to be in a position to increase the volume of the economy, the size of the economy, the volume of the water in the glass. What alternatives do we have? In the meantime, oops, we have spent money already. What is the alternative we have? The alternative we have is to actually keep pouring it. And this keeps pouring, and guess what's happened? It's dried up, or it's drying up. So same. Same. What's the alternative? I asked the question, what's the alternative? What we really need to do is to increase the size of the volume of water in this glass. We need to freeze the water to build structures and processes, fill it up with ice cubes, so that there is a fundamental turning of that ice cube into water. And that's what traditional economies do. And what we are doing is, we're not worried about the ice cube that we're creating. Same. So this means, what I'm really suggesting here is that, A, we need to actually start the discourse not in terms of what the governments are doing alone, and which party is doing what, but really it's a question about saying, what are the reactions that are taking place through the government initiatives? Because I fundamentally believe that every one of us wants to do the right thing, wants to do the most positive thing that they can ever do. And therefore, I want to have a dialogue with the people here, the enlightened people here who matter to me, that in spite of all the hassles and the troubles and so on, investments keep coming, people keep going, people leave the territory, people come to the territory, but the reality is we need to do something different, not same. Thank you, Kilian.
Thank you, Ram. Look, on that score, Clare, can I go to you, please? You've been part of Team NT now for 15 months. Can you explain what Team NT is and what it has achieved to date?
Thanks. It picks up actually very nicely from where you were, Ram. If we want to start doing things a little differently, then something like Team NT is exactly what the government has in mind by appointing 3 of us 15 months ago. So the 3 of us were appointed. We're actually the executive of Team NT, and what the team is everyone in the territory. So it's everyone in this room, and it's all about growing the territory's economy. So the 3 of us are one from the private sector, Dick Goit, Paul Tyrrell, who was in the public sector for a long time, and myself. So 3 different aspects looking at growing the economy. And between us, I think we counted up, we had something like 110 years experience of working in the territory. So I think we almost qualify as Territorians, which is great. Government has tasked us with looking at particular areas of the economy and how we can inject our experience and strategies into those. We're only 3 of us, we're part-timers, and I think the key success, or the areas we've focused on over the last 15 months have been, firstly, gas. And if you remember, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the idea about onshore gas was that we would put it in a pipeline and send it south. Well, I think the last year and a half has seen that change quite considerably. And what Team NT is leading is about how we can use that gas in the territory, either offshore or onshore, to develop industries here. Industries that need gas as energy, industries that need gas as input. And so we're really pursuing that. But as you know, it's a very long game. It's going to take years to talk to the companies both around Australia, to talk to companies around the world about the opportunities for investing in different ways in gas in the Territory. And so Team NT has certainly started that work. Another aspect of our work is in defence. Considerable amount of billions of dollars, either from the Americans or from Canberra, into defence facilities here in the top end over the next 10 years. But what we want to make sure is that every single possible job is gained in the Territory from that expenditure. And there needs to be considerable work and knocking on doors and persuading, particularly Canberra, with all due respect, that we need to have local employment through that investment. And one of the aspects I'm involved in, and it goes to things that Mardi was saying about population, I've been talking to companies who are interstate but who work here about how they can build their workforce presence here and their corporate presence here. And there's a lot of companies who are very interested in us, but what I've been kind of having conversations about is we don't want to see fly in, fly out. We want to see companies commit to bring their workforce to Darwin and to grow that workforce. And look, there's a lot of interest, I can tell you. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but these are the kind of things that need to have you knocking on doors, then going back and continuing the conversation. I've also been working with the international students area, and I think one of the reflections I have is that when I was Chief Minister in 2001, I did a lot of investment missions because I found that nobody knew about us. We were then a very well-kept secret. And dishearteningly, we are still that very well-kept secret. People have no idea. When you start talking about the opportunities here, how we live, what are the kind of amenities we have are, people are genuinely surprised. And we have to keep doing that as a community, as from government's point of view. But we all have to get in and start persuading the rest of Australia, the rest of the world, particularly our region, that we are somewhere that you can live and work and prosper. And it's a big task. So that's, I mean, I could go on further, but I think that's enough.
All right. Well, Clare, I just want to follow on that because this is one question that I think would be on the lips of almost everyone in this room. You were Chief Minister and largely responsible for bringing the INPEX project to the Territory by knocking on doors and by effectively stealing it from Western Australia, as I recall. If you knew then what you know now, would you have done anything differently to have avoided or minimised the impact of the recession that the local economy has been going through for the past 3 years following the completion of the project?
I think one of the things that we have to probably address here in the Territory is learning from the past. I mean, people who've been around long enough will have known that the Army presence in the North investment in the 90s was a very big boom into our economy. And then we saw a slowdown following that. We've seen that happen over the years. And it's all very well to say with hindsight that the thought, the strategy, the preparation post-INPEX should have been tackled at the time that INPEX signed on the dotted line. We knew how big the project was going to be. It's ended up being a $50 billion project. We knew it was going to take a significant workforce to do. And so we should have been tackling what it was going to look like after INPEX had finished construction, probably back in 2011, 2012. My view now is we should have been stashing away money that was gained from the sale of assets and realised that once the INPEX injection into the economy was over, that we would need that for expenditure. And it's not, I don't think Ram would disagree, it's not rocket science. It's kind of managing our economy and managing our expectations. And so we get to a situation where we're surprised that there's a downturn after the INPEX project. But I really think, given our history, you would expect it. I mean, we've gone back to a kind of the trajectory of growth that was there before INPEX, but we needed to do the work along the way. And while Dave's here, former Treasurer, one of the things that really surprised me after all that injection, can I be a little controversial, Leon?
That's what we're here for.
Okay, good, excellent. It surprised me after all that injection of growth from IMPEX, and I mean, you all know that it was a very buoyant economy at the time. Why, in the 16-17 budget year, did we come out of that time of prosperity with a deficit of nearly $800 million? I just wonder. I mean, I look back and I thought, how did we get there when we had these years of growth and when we had a lot of private sector expenditure, which is what Ram's talking about, into our economy, that we ended up with a government deficit of $800 million, which we've now seen the current government struggle to contain because of other GST cuts and things like that, which were predicted back at that time. So I think we need to understand where we've come from. I don't resign at all from nicking the IMPEX project from West Australia. That's fine. And I think it's been great for the territory. I think we can build on what we've got here as a gas hub. But we needed to have managed the process better.
Dave, you wrote a fabulous piece in the NT News last month. In fact, I can't recall a single time where someone has rung me at work to ask me if I'd read an article in the NT News. And on that day, I had about 3 people ring me to ask me if I'd read your piece. When I first read it, no disrespect intended, Dave, I wasn't sure whether you'd written this or not. but you assure me that you have. So I just want you to tell us. I mean, the title of the article was "The NT, Where Good Businesses Go to Die," and I can say without a word of a lie, it resonated throughout the economy. Can you talk to that article and explain to us a little bit of the background as to why you wrote it and what your current feelings are on the NT?
Well, the reason I wrote the article, Leon, is because fundamentally people are running around blaming the government for the state of the circumstances that we're currently in. My view is it's a cultural issue amongst our population. We have become unbelievably anti-development, anti-enterprise, and anti-entrepreneurialism. There's nothing that anybody wants to do in the territory that meets with approval these days. And it's easy to sit there and blame the government, but I sit there and look at the government and I think, well, hang on, let's backtrack to the last election. They really said 3 main things in opposition that they would do in government. 1, they would restore the money to the public service that the CLP stripped. 2, that they would review all development approvals in the last 18 months of the previous government, which they did. And 3, that they would put a 2-year moratorium on gas. Now, I mean, I don't know who believes that those 3 policies wouldn't have put us into the position that we have in today. And, all credit to Michael Gunner. He's absolutely done what he committed to do. He has restored the money to the public service, he has stopped development, and he has put a moratorium on gas. And most of the territory cheered. In actual fact, the previous government got wiped out because most Territorians, it seemed to me, were happy with the anti-development policies of this Labor government. And now we sort of sit here in some sort of shock horror, wondering why the economy is dead. And I would like to respond to Clare's little challenge. It's easy to sit there and say that the previous government had no plans. And why did we leave an $800 million deficit? But let me just reacquaint you with some things. We leased the port. The reason why we leased the port was we wanted to engage with China in the One Belt, One Road initiative through trade. So the Northern Territory would be on a trade route. We were unapologetically pro-gas. We wanted to see the development of the Beetaloo Basin instantly, and if people recall, the last hole that was fracked, or stimulated, as Stephanie would say, was in the election campaign 2 years ago. Since then, nothing's happened. I know that there's plans to start that again. But the idea was that gas would supply an industry park, an onshore industry park that would do petrochemicals, fertilisers, plastics, all of that sort of stuff at Glide Point. It's why we committed $40 million to bitumenise the Glide Point Road. It's why we set up the Infrastructure Development Fund in order to start priming that major development out at Glide Point. There's a township out there that's supposed to have 10,000 people, Murrumjuk. But when you sit there and you put a moratorium on gas, when you wind up the Infrastructure Development Fund, when you walk away from deals that you do with the Chinese, and then you sit there and say, oh, hang on, the previous government didn't have a plan. No, that's not right. Previous government did have a plan, had a good idea about how we would see our way through past the Impex cliff, as people were talking about. But all those plans were stopped. You know, it'll be another 10 years before we have a gung-ho onshore gas industry here in the Northern Territory.
On that note, can I introduce Stephanie Stonier to the equation? Stephanie, obviously, everyone in this room is pinning their hopes on something to lead us out of this recovery. Some say it's US defence, others say it's gas. You're obviously heavily involved in the gas industry and in fracking and the whole discussion that's been had. You've heard Dave's comments. What do you bring to the party?
Well, I feel a lot of pressure. Look, I agree with other comments from people who've spoken today that there is no silver bullet for our economy, both in the short, medium and long term. But there is every reason to be optimistic and positive that the natural resource we have, which is collectively owned by all of us as Territorians, does, in an exploration success case, hold what could very comfortably described as transformational benefits for the Northern Territory. And there's a number of things I've heard people talk about, and what we know about our economy, and Ram and I talked about this a little earlier, is yes, there are very good industries that contribute to our collective health and well-being, so tourism, agriculture, defence, but it is they're quite small contributors. So we self-generate around 20% of our own revenue, but we're 80% reliant on the federal government, either through GST receipts or other federal funding. And as Clare said, it will take a while before we are established. And but what this is not, what the Beetaloo project is not, it is not a construction project. It is a long-term, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, in fact, decade in, decade out, opportunity for us to harvest our natural resources in a sustainable way that returns direct revenue to the Northern Territory, taking us to being about 50% economically independent. We also then have a commodity that is required right around the world, in the East Coast, of course, doubling the market here in the Territory to increase other and attract other enterprise and industries, as well as sharing the natural gas resource that we have with a market like in China, Korea, Japan and India that are heavily reliant on coal, and we have an opportunity to displace those coal-generated power stations with gas-generated power stations, obviously delivering a substantial reduction in carbon emissions. That as a base actually links to everything else that everybody's talked about. So in terms of jobs, there's some phases, and I will take some time to talk about this because I think you all need to invest some time yourselves to understand it so you can get comfortable with it, you can advocate it, and you can do your part to bring this opportunity to realisation for all of us. But let's just assume we have success, and that'll take us another 2 or 3 years to really test and determine the resource and is it commercial and all of those sorts of things. But let's just say we find ourselves in a situation where a decision has been taken to proceed with a development. A development is something like 1,000 terajoules a day coming out of the ground. This is just from Origin. And we would do that from about 50 well pads. So it'll take us about 10 years to install all of those well pads and the associated wells, and then we go into steady state productions. So just if you can remember, ramp up to steady state, about 1,500 jobs just with us. In steady state, we're talking about 1,000. So the numbers aren't small, they're substantial. Now, in terms of the volumes of gas that I described, currently the Territory uses, or contracts actually, about 90 TJs of gas a day. They don't use it all, but let's just call it 100 TJs a day. Even if we reserve, and I'm probably not meant to talk about gas reservation, but for the purposes of understanding the amount of gas we have, in a success case, we could easily hold on to some of that and double the gas market in the Territory to ensure that we can provide the cheapest source of gas or cheapest source of energy to those manufacturing organisations like the fertilising companies, the brick manufacturers, the glass manufacturers, so on and so forth. There is then ample gas to share with the East Coast, and there is also ample gas to then be exported, potentially, if the economics stack up, out of Darwin. And that means the construction of another 2 or 3 trains here in Darwin. But the other immediate work that would need to be done is the addition of pipeline infrastructure. So today, our pipeline infrastructure, combined, the new pipeline, the Amadeus running north-south and the pipeline out to the MacArthur River, is just over 200 terajoules a day. So again, we've got 10 times more gas than that potentially coming out of the ground with Santos and Origin combined. So we need to build those pipeline corridors to make sure that when we start harvesting that gas, it comes straight out of the ground and into a pipeline. Again, there's going to be a multitude of jobs that come with that construction work associated with the pipelines. So here, let's go take all of that work consistently over the next, really starting up, say, in about 5 years' time. So there's exploration and appraisal work to be done, but it's more ad hoc and it's intermittent. But when we get into ramp up and steady state, I've now described largely around 3,000 to 6,000 jobs. What we do know is both Origin and Santos and Pangaea have made commitments that of the jobs that they have, they will ensure that a very large percentage of those jobs, in fact over 50%, will be NT based. So let's just do a little bit of maths. So let's just say it's even 5,000 jobs. So you've got 5,000 jobs, half of those, let's say, based in the Territory, 2.5. Let's multiply that by 4, because people are living here, they've got their partner and their children. We've now got 10,000 new residents in the Northern Territory, increasing our share of GST, increasing our population for people that are going to need housing and stabilising out that real estate market for us, particularly in Darwin. You now have people living here that are going to spending their money at the bakery, the boutique, the dry cleaner, the restaurant, so on and so forth. So there is a very positive future that is linked back to an industry that is going, in a success case, again, I'm very cautious to remind everyone of that, that there is a lot of things that become possible over a sustained period of time. And when I say sustained period of time, the estimates are out of various geological assessments, either from the Northern Territory Government, independent assessments, and also from our own specialist staff. There's hundreds of TCF of gas in that basin. Not all of it is going to be recoverable. Typically, our announcement that we did to the Stock Exchange and the Northern Territory Government in early 2017 was around 60 TCF. So that's just on about 2,000 square kilometres in the basin, and there's over 34,000 square kilometres. So there is a phenomenal resource there, developed sustainably, could continue to be developed over, legitimately over a 30, 40, 50-year period. So I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take questions later, but again, it's no silver bullet. The prospectivity is good. And in a success case, everyone benefits. What I was actually going to do was going to take the opportunity to bust some myths. And I like to learn from the past, but I'm not especially interested in dissecting it too much. I'd like to be part of contributing to what we can create together. But there is value in what both Clare and Dave said with looking back. Why did we have the moratorium? And there'll be a number of different reasons. But if you look at the first slide, which has got images of Aboriginal people at the Beetaloo well site. So there's a very, very unfortunate myth in our community that is traditional owners don't support this industry. And that is not a straight story. It is not a true story. Like, the fact of the matter is that every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person in this country is a traditional owner for somewhere. But the images that are put quite deliberately in front of us of Aboriginal people, including young children opposing this industry, are not the native title holders for either Santos's permit area, Origin's permit area, and other permit holders in the basin. They are traditional owners from outside of that project area who have had little, if no, contact with industry at all to have their concerns and questions listened to and answered. So I just wanted to share this image with you that the actual native title holders for this land where our permits are fully consenting to the activities. Those consents are contained in legally binding agreements. The traditional owners are active participants in the work program, so they decide where wells can and can't go. They out doing survey work and field work on a regular basis, and indeed one of our native title holders is also a business owner down in Elliot who has a contract with us to do the well monitoring. So that one's about busting a myth. The one with regards to the opportunity, which is this one here, Dave talked about some of the successful basins in America and Canada. What we do know about the Beetaloo, the rocks themselves, the physical characteristics and properties of those rocks, is that they are very similar to what we see in the Marcellus and the Utica. So in a 10-year time period where that area contributed 0% of gas production in the United States, now represents in excess of 25% of the United States energy production. In a 10-year period, in an environment where private investment was encouraged, regulated, but not delayed. So it also meant that the United States, because of that contribution from natural gas, has reduced its carbon emissions by 16%. It's pretty exciting. The next one's about the global market. I'm not going to do it. All these slide packs, I do in a presentation to workforces. So I'm more than happy to accept an invitation from any of you in this room to come and share this information with you in a more presentable way. But the last myth I want to bust is this slide that you can see on conventional and unconventional. This is really important. So again, we find ourselves having a moratorium because apparently we don't know how to manage and regulate onshore gas in Northern Territory. And I am always surprised at this because we have had an onshore gas industry using hydraulic fracture stimulation, fracking, for over 40 years. And that is at Mardi. It has been well regulated by the public servants that work in those departments, and not once in that 40 years of evidence and history do we see a scenario of one that is described by the Yellow Triangle people who tell folks that their water is going to be contaminated, their children are going to get sick, their fish are going to die, so therefore you better not support this industry and you better get behind blocking fracking in the NT. It astounds me that so many Territorians do not know that because of fracking at Mardi, Darwin's lights stayed on and air conditioners stayed on for many, many a year before the offshore discoveries were brought into the system. So this is not a new industry. This is a long-standing industry in the Territory. Admittedly, shale as a resource, as a source rock, is a new sector of the industry, no doubt about that. But What activists will have you believe, and this is what Justice Pepper queried them on in the inquiry, can you please describe to us why you're comfortable with fracking at Mereenie, but you're not comfortable with fracking in the Beetaloo? And the answer was very simple. It's because conventional fracking, we're okay with that, because that's different from unconventional fracking. I can assure you that fracking is fracking, is fracking, same, right? What conventional and unconventional the term is used for is actually the gas basin, the gas reservoir. So what's on here is, on the left, conventional, offshore and onshore. So basically you've got offshore blacktip example and onshore Mereenie example. All conventional means is the gas that the rock that the gas was formed in is no longer holding that gas. So it's migrated from a source rock, been trapped by a geological barrier, and you can just go down and lift it out, assuming you've got the right velocity and lift and everything in that particular geological formation. Unconventional means that the source rock remains the host rock. So in the case of the shale, the gas has never moved. It hasn't moved. It's over 1.4 billion years old, that gas down in the Beetaloo. And at that time, it was just an inland sea, single-cell organisms on the planet, and basically algae, and that's what that organic matter is down in those rocks now. In coal seams, it's difficult for the gas to move on its own because there's water in those coal seam systems, so it pressurises it. So in a coal seam scenario, they actually extract the water, depressurises the system, and the gas can flow more readily. The other thing they say is that all unconventional has to be fracked, and conventional doesn't. And again, that's just not a straight story. So Mereenie's, 30% of the wells at Mereenie have been fracture stimulated, and around 15% of the wells in the Queensland gas fields have been fracture stimulated. So again, there is an abundance of myth-truth out in our community. So if you actually want the facts, you want more information, so you can carry your own barbecue conversation and get behind us to help bring these, collective and varied benefits to all of us, then I'm happy to accept an invitation to do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. But based on what Stephanie said, and I can assure you, I'd never met Stephanie until last week, in fact, yesterday. And so all of this was quite enlightening and interesting. Ram, do you see any of this as being making ice cubes?
The answer is it depends. The reason I say that is because we've heard all these stories before. Same. I want to now focus on different. And I think the first thing is that we need to be very clear that there is a difference between source and a resource. For me, gas is a resource, not a source. For us in the territory, people are the source. They are the sink at the same time. So whatever happens, the fundamental question, and it's very interesting to see the absence of conversation from the gas or fracking. The people were mentioned in terms of the jobs that it's going to create, and also in terms of the indigeneity to a certain extent. But the fundamental question that I have is that when people are actually anti-fracking or fracking, surely there is a fundamental question here. Why do people believe in what they believe? And I think we need to actually address that. I think the elephant in the room has to be addressed in order to make sure that we are in a position to get the maximum benefit out of the distinction about how do people actually feel about this before we give it to the political masters of saying, you're wrong or I'm wrong. I think we need to actually start a conversation which hasn't happened. The second is, in terms of the other country comparisons, I always have a problem with this, because when we are transplanting opinions from other places, the context and the connection and the continuity and the change and the cooperation and the competition in other countries is quite different to ours. We are unique and in our own way. So therefore, I think it's extremely important for us to make sure that if we want to go ahead with fracking, go ahead with new discoveries, go ahead with changes, we need to start thinking in terms of saying, what does it mean in the territory context, not just import it. I'll give you a very, very simple example. When you want a heart transplant done, the fundamental question that surgeons will ask themselves, will the host body accept a new heart? This is exactly what I really want the discussion to be about, in terms of saying, if there are ideas coming from somewhere else, will that fit our body? Will that fit our framework? If it doesn't, then we have to go and emulate the conditions under which it is possible to be accepted. And the third and the final one for me is the distinction in terms of saying that when we borrow ideas, when we borrow things, when we borrow in terms of the short term, the long term, and the immediate, the fundamental question that comes to mind always is, and that's why I said, Leon, it depends. What happens when that project no longer exists? This is a very fundamental question. 50 years is not too long. Of course, it's long in my life. I'll be dead and gone. But the reality is, in the territory, it's not long. I mean, we've heard of Rum Jungle. We've heard of so many mines coming in, going out. And what the question really is in terms of saying, what happens? How is the business going to react to this? You know, Clare talked about army presence in the north, APIN. One of the economic impacts of APIN was to actually, I believe, I wasn't here, but I believe that there were a lot of people who sold their little, resigned from their jobs and started cafes, thinking that there will be a huge expenditure from the government, Commonwealth government, and they burned their shirts. I think the fundamental issue is so many projects have come, so many projects have gone, we still are stuck in the same rut. Therefore, different. Thank you.